Some stories begin with love. Others begin with betrayal. 5 years ago, at a crowded international airport, a powerful Korean billionaire CEO made a decision that would change 3 lives forever. He walked away from his pregnant wife. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he believed she had destroyed everything they built together. To him, she was a traitor. A woman who sold his company's secrets to a rival. And when she revealed she was carrying his child, he didn't believe her. So he left. No goodbye. No second chance. No looking back. What he didn't know was that the truth he trusted was a lie. 5 years passed. His empire grew larger. His power became untouchable. But somewhere far away, the woman he abandoned was building something of her own. And raising the daughter he had never met. Until one unexpected moment changed everything. 30,000 feet in the air, on a quiet flight to a billion-dollar business conference, a little girl sitting beside him looked up and asked a simple question. A question that would shatter his world. "Mommy says you're the man who forgot us." In that moment, the billionaire CEO realized something terrifying. The past he buried 5 years ago had just found him again. The seatbelt sign went off at 30,000 feet, and Park Ji-won had not moved since it did. He sat in 2A first class, window, Seoul to Singapore, with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, a folder of acquisition briefs he hadn't opened, and a silence he'd spent 5 years carefully constructing around himself. Outside, the clouds were thick and white and indifferent, the same way he'd trained himself to be. His assistant had described him to a journalist once as a man who operates purely on logic. Ji-won had not corrected her. It was easier to let people believe that. Logic was clean. Logic did not wake you at 3 in the morning over something you couldn't calculate your way out of. Logic did not have a face. He reached for the scotch. And then a small voice said, very quietly, "You're the man who forgot us." Ji-won's hand stopped. He turned slowly. In the aisle seat beside him sat a little girl he had not noticed boarding. She was perhaps 4, maybe 5, with dark braided hair and eyes so steady and serious they belonged on someone 3 times her age. She was looking directly at him. Not with accusation. Not with tears. Just with this devastating certainty, the way children say things that are absolutely and completely true. "What did you say?" His voice came out quieter than he intended. She tilted her head. "Mommy says you're the man who forgot us." The scotch glass cracked against the tray table as Ji-won set it down too hard. The flight attendant glanced over. He waved her off. The little girl didn't flinch. She simply turned back to the window and pressed her small hand flat against the glass, watching the clouds the way children watch things they find genuinely miraculous. Ji-won sat very still. Around him, first class hummed with the soft sounds of engines and recirculated air and other people's peace. His heart was doing something he hadn't felt it do in 5 years. It was running. 6 years ago, Park Ji-won was not yet a billionaire. He was 29 years old, sleeping 4 hours a night in an office the size of a storage closet, eating convenience store kimbap at his desk, and pouring every hour he had into a company he and one other person had built from an idea written on a napkin. The company was called Novison Technologies. The idea was a proprietary data compression algorithm so clean and elegant it bordered on art. The other person was his wife. Her name was Amanda. Amanda Okafor, Nigerian, Igbo, born and raised in Awka, Anambra State, the second daughter of an engineer father and a schoolteacher mother who had told her from the age of 7 that her brain was her most valuable inheritance and she had better use it accordingly. She had taken that instruction seriously. She came to Korea on a graduate research scholarship, completed a master's degree in software engineering at KAIST with the kind of grades that made department heads use words like exceptional in corridors when they thought the students weren't listening, and had been working as a systems consultant for a mid-sized Seoul tech firm when she found Ji-won's job posting and responded with a cover letter that read, in part, "Your current architecture has 4 structural vulnerabilities that will become critical within 18 months. I can fix 3 immediately and the 4th will require a conversation." He had called her within the hour. They had argued for 90 minutes. He had hired her on the spot. She was 26. She wore her natural hair in thick, precise braids when she meant business and loose when she felt like herself, and Ji-won had learned early which was which. She had a laugh that arrived suddenly and left no warning, a real one, the kind people can't perform, and she deployed it rarely enough that when it happened it felt like a reward. She was sharper than anyone he had ever worked with and entirely unbothered by the fact that she was, in most rooms they entered together, the only person who looked like her. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed a room's permission to belong in it. That was who she was. Not just his wife. She was the second brain of Novasin, the one who wrote the original licensing framework, who flew to Busan alone to pitch their first enterprise client, who called him out loudly and without apology when his ego was making bad decisions. She was the only person on earth who could walk into his office, sit across from him with that look on her face, and make him feel both challenged and completely safe at the same time. Their story was not a dramatic love story in the way that songs are written about. There were no grand gestures. There were late nights and arguments over architecture and cold coffee and the specific tenderness of two people who have agreed, without quite saying so, that they are building something together that matters more than being right. He had once canceled a dinner reservation because they were mid-problem on a load balancing issue and neither of them wanted to stop. They ate convenience store triangle rice in the office at 10:30, and she had fallen asleep on the floor with a whiteboard marker still in her hand. He had put a jacket over her. He had stood there for a moment looking at her and felt something so enormous and quiet he hadn't known what to call it. He knew what to call it now. He loved her the way brilliant, guarded men sometimes love quietly, and too late to say it often enough, and always slightly terrified of how much. The company grew. Fast, then faster. By year 3, they had 40 employees. By year 4, Novasin was being called one of the most promising data infrastructure firms in Southeast Asia. Ji-won started being photographed at conferences. His name appeared in the Korea Economic Daily. He got used to the weight of being watched. And then TerraCorp happened. TerraCorp was a Singaporean tech firm, larger, better funded, more aggressive. They had been racing Novasin to market with a competing compression framework for 2 years, and they were losing. Everyone in the industry knew it. And then, on a Thursday morning in March, TerraCorp held a press conference and unveiled a product that was structurally, architecturally, in ways that made Ji-won's lead engineer go pale, almost identical to Novasin's core technology. Not inspired by, not adjacent to, the same logic, the same structural approach, the same sequence of decisions that Amanda and Ji-won alone had made together. The room felt like it tilted. Ji-won's legal team was on the phone within the hour. His board convened an emergency session by noon. And by 2 o'clock, an anonymous email had arrived in the company's internal legal inbox with 3 attached files, encrypted communication logs, access records from Novasin's proprietary server, and a draft contract bearing a TerraCorp header and Amanda Okafor's name. Ji-won read the files 4 times. His hands were flat on the desk. His face was flat. Inside him something was collapsing floor by floor, the way a controlled demolition works, methodically, inevitably, in a sequence no one can stop once it begins. He should have called his lawyer first. He should have called the head of security, should have ordered an independent forensic audit of the access records before he said a single word. That was what a rational man would have done. But rational men do not confront the people they love with the same efficiency they apply to quarterly reports, because to do so, they would have to admit that love and logic are not the same category of problem. Ji-won had always made the mistake of treating them as if they were. He called her into his office at 3 in the afternoon. She walked in the way she always did, with her coffee, her tablet, her absolute conviction that she belonged in any room she entered. She looked at him. She looked at the screen. And her face shifted into something he had never seen on her before. Ji-won. Explain it, he said. His voice was stone. I don't know what those files are. I've never seen that contract. I've never contacted TerraCorp. She set her coffee down and moved toward the desk. Someone built this. Someone planted it. Ji-won, look at me. The access logs have your credentials. Credentials that anyone with internal access could have duplicated. G1. Your name is on the contract. Then someone put it there. Her voice cracked on the last word, the first time he had ever heard it do that in 4 years, through every hard negotiation and every sleepless quarter and every time the company nearly died. She steadied herself. Her eyes were bright. I did not do this. I would never, you know me. You know who I am. I need you to believe me. He looked at her for a long time. The clock on the wall measured out 8 seconds. The evidence is fabricated. She hit the desk with her open hand, not in anger, in desperation. G1, please. Do not do this. Do not choose paper over 5 years. Do not choose paper over me. He looked back at the screen. It was easier than looking at her face. I need you to step down from operations, he said. Pending investigation. The silence after that sentence was the worst sound he'd ever produced. If you've been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, stay with this story, because what happened next will hit very close to home. Drop a comment below. Have you ever misjudged someone who is telling the truth? Amanda did not cry in his office. She picked up her coffee. She walked out. She cleared her desk in 40 minutes. He could see her through the glass partition from where he sat, moving with that same precise efficiency she brought to everything, except her face was completely empty now in a way that made something in his chest grab and pull. He did not go out. He told himself he was giving her space. He told himself the investigation would clarify things. He told himself he was being rational. He was being a coward. But he didn't know that yet. She called him that evening. He let it go to voicemail. She called again at 11. He turned the phone face down. The next morning, his assistant told him Amanda had booked a flight. He drove to the airport. He didn't know why, some animal instinct that the rational part of him had not yet managed to fully extinguish. He found her at the International Departures Terminal, one bag over her shoulder, her braids loose around her face, wearing the oversized gray cardigan she always wore when she was exhausted. She turned and saw him, and for a half-second something moved in her eyes. Then her face went quiet again. I'm not going to fight for something I shouldn't have to fight for, she said. No preamble. I told you the truth. You made your choice. Amanda. He stepped toward her. She held up her hand. There's something else. She looked at him steadily. I'm pregnant. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. He felt the rings spread outward. He started. Yours. Her voice was flat now. Not angry. Flat was worse. In case that's what you were going to say. It was. He was ashamed of it the moment she named it. Amanda, wait. We can. Don't. Her voice didn't rise. It just went harder. Don't say we right now. You stopped believing in we yesterday afternoon. She picked up her bag. If you want to be part of this child's life, you know where to find me. But I won't beg. I begged yesterday, and it cost me something I'm never getting back. She walked through the departure gate without looking back. G1 stood at the barrier for a long time. Around him, the airport continued its enormous indifferent motion, announcements and rolling luggage and families embracing and strangers passing. He was a man in the middle of all that motion who could not move. He told himself she would call. She didn't call. He told himself he would call her. He didn't call her either. And then Novosin was acquired by a Korean conglomerate for 400 billion won, and G1 walked out of the deal as a 30-year-old billionaire with a hollow chest and a company to rebuild. And 5 years passed the way years pass when you have filled every hour with work so you do not have to feel the hours. The pregnancy had been real. The loneliness had been catastrophic. And the betrayal, the original one, the data leak, the planted evidence, had been exactly what Amanda said it was. But she didn't know any of that for certain yet, and neither did he, and so she did the only thing left to do. She survived. She flew home to Anambra first, back to Akka, back to her mother's house in GRA, the same house where she had grown up memorizing textbooks and arguing with her father about engineering theory across the dinner table. Her mother had opened the door, taken one long look at her face, and said nothing. Just stepped aside and let her in. That was the thing about home. The real kind, it didn't ask for an explanation before it let you through. She spent the first trimester sick every morning and sitting with her mother every evening on the veranda, drinking Zobo and watching the street the way she had watched it as a child, when the world had felt entirely manageable. Her mother did not press her. Her father brought her books. Her younger sister, Chisholm, who had always been the loudest person in any room, was quietly, thoroughly present in a way that Amanda had not known she needed until she had it. She stayed 3 months. Then she went back to Singapore because that was where the work was, and work was what she had left, and she had never in her life sat still when motion was available. She spent the second trimester job hunting every afternoon and lying awake every night in a studio apartment she'd rented near Tiong Bahru, with her hand on her stomach having conversations with a person who wasn't born yet. "I don't know who you'll look like," she whispered once at 3 in the morning, with the fan going and the city humming outside the window. "But I know who you'll be. Because I'm your mother and I will make sure of it." She named her Yuna. She kept Jiwon's surname, Park Yuna, which some people called foolish and she called practical, because she knew whose daughter her daughter was, and she would not pretend otherwise. Yuna was born on a Tuesday in November, 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with her father's eyes, dark and serious and completely alert from the first moment, and her mother's jaw, which had always been the more formidable part of Amanda's face. Amanda looked at her daughter for the first time and cried, which surprised her, because she had spent 8 months training herself not to. She had built a wall around the part of herself that had loved Jiwon, not to protect herself from the memory, but to protect Yuna from being born into bitterness. She wanted her daughter to arrive into a world that felt like hope, not aftermath. She had not entirely succeeded, but she had come close enough. And when she saw Yuna's face, those eyes, his eyes, looking up at her with that impossible, absolute newness, she understood for the first time that some things are irreducible. That a person could be made of love and loss at the same time, and that this was not a contradiction. It was just life. Then she stopped crying, wiped her face, and started building. The company she eventually founded was called Cyan Technologies, a name she chose deliberately because she wanted it to be personal. She wanted it to cost her something every time she said it. Cheap ambition fades. The kind rooted in pain tends to last. She started with 2 things Jiwon had not been able to take from her, her brain and her knowledge of Novasin's weaknesses. Not to steal. Not to sabotage. She had been one of Novasin's architects, and she understood, better than anyone, the gaps they hadn't filled yet, the markets they'd deprioritized, the clients they'd left feeling unheard. She went after those clients quietly, personally, with a product that solved what Novasin hadn't. The first year was brutal. She was raising a newborn and running a 2-person startup simultaneously, working during Yuna's nap times, taking calls in the hallway outside the nursery, sending pitch decks at midnight. Her neighbor in the Tiong Bahru block, a retired Singaporean woman named Mrs. Lim, who had decided unilaterally to become involved in the situation, became her unofficial childminder, her sounding board, and the only person in Singapore who ever saw Amanda cry a second time. By Yuna's second birthday, Cyan had 12 employees. By her third, 45. By her fourth, they were being described in Singaporean financial press as the fastest-growing data infrastructure company in Southeast Asia. Jiwon was being described the same way in Korean press. They had never been in the same room since the airport. Meanwhile, Park Jiwon was becoming a very rich, very successful, very hollow man. Novasin rebuilt after the TerraCorp scandal, which, for what it was worth, eventually fell apart under legal scrutiny, TerraCorp losing 3 separate IP suits in Singapore and Seoul. Their executives eventually investigated for corporate espionage. Jiwon's board had quietly dropped the investigation into Amanda 18 months after she left, finding insufficient evidence to support the original claims. No one had called her to tell her that. He told himself he would be the one to call. He opened her contact 3 times. He never pressed dial. Some combination of shame and pride and fear formed a door he couldn't figure out how to open, and so he left it closed and called it moving forward. He was, by every measurable standard, winning. Novasin partnered with 3 major government infrastructure projects. Ji-won was photographed on the covers of Forbes Korea and Business Today. He moved into a penthouse in Gangnam. He had a driver and a chef and an assistant who managed his calendar with military precision. He was, his publicist once said, the most sought-after mind in Korean tech. He was also alone in a way that had begun to feel architectural, not like a mood, but like a feature of the building. He dated twice in 5 years. Both women were intelligent, accomplished, and completely uninterested in the version of him that showed up, which was not unkind, but was not present. One of them told him on their 3rd date, over a dinner he'd barely touched, "You're the most technically impressive person I've ever had a conversation with, and somehow also the least there." He'd thanked her. She'd looked at him like that was exactly the problem. The other one simply stopped returning his messages after their 2nd date and, when his assistant called to reschedule, said only, "Tell him I hope he finds whatever he's looking for." He had not known what to do with that sentence. He had put it somewhere and not retrieved it. Until now. Now he thought he understood exactly what she'd meant. Then Cyan Technologies started appearing in his quarterly reports. At first it was minor, one client rerouted, then another. A contract that Novasin had considered signed going to a competitor from Singapore he'd never heard of. His business development director flagged it as routine market pressure. Ji-won flagged it as a pattern because patterns were what he saw before other people did. He pulled the Cyan Technologies profile. The company's CEO was listed as A. Okafor. No photograph. No media profile. No conference appearances on record. He stared at the name for a long time. He told himself it was a coincidence. He told himself a lot of things. Then Cyan won the Meridian infrastructure contract, a Singapore government deal that Novasin had spent 8 months courting and considered locked. It was the largest enterprise contract in the region that year. Ji-won read the announcement in his car on a Tuesday morning and felt something cold move through his stomach. His competitive intelligence team spent 3 weeks trying to identify Cyan's principal architect and strategy lead. They came back with brilliant, invisible, methodical, and, this was the word 3 different industry sources used, relentless. Ji-won knew exactly one person who could be described with all 4 of those words. He booked the flight to the Singapore Economic Summit that same afternoon. Which was how he ended up in 2A, with a glass of scotch, next to a little girl who had just dismantled 5 years of armored distance with 9 words. He looked at her again. She was still watching the clouds. Her feet didn't reach the floor. They swung in small arcs, the way children's feet do when they're somewhere between bored and content. She was wearing white trainers with a small pink star on each side. A child's backpack sat at her feet, dark blue, printed with little space shuttles. "What's your name?" he heard himself ask. His voice felt like it was coming from a long distance. She turned from the window. "Yuna." The name entered him like cold air. "Yuna," he repeated. "That's a beautiful name." She considered this gravely, as though evaluating whether to accept the compliment. "I know. Mommy chose it. She says it means gentle, but she is not always gentle." She said this with complete factual seriousness. "She is mostly determined." Ji-won's chest did something complicated. "Is your mommy on this flight?" "She's in the back. She had phone calls to make. She told me to sit here and not talk to strangers." A pause. "You're a stranger." "I am," he agreed. "But you look sad," she said. "Mommy says that sad people need someone to talk to more than they need rules." He looked at this child. 5 years old, maybe. Dark, serious eyes. Her mother's jaw. And something in the architecture of her face, in the particular way her brow folded when she was thinking, that he recognized the way you recognize something you've seen in a mirror. His heart was not running anymore. It had stopped completely. "Yuna," he said carefully. "Do you know your mommy's full name?" "Amanda Okafor," she said. Then she turned back to the window. "But everyone at the office calls her CEO. I call her mommy. I think mine is better." If this story is giving you chills right now, you need to hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started. The best part is coming. Stay right there. Ji-won sat with the name for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds in which the entire architecture of the last 5 years reorganized itself around a new center of gravity. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out his phone, and looked at the contact he had opened 3 times and never dialed. Amanda Okafor. Somewhere on this aircraft, behind him, that contact was real and present and breathing. He put the phone away. He looked at his daughter, who did not know she was his daughter, who was pressing her nose against the airplane window and fogging the glass with her breath and then drawing a small circle in the fog with her fingertip. He did not speak. He could not speak. The scotch sat untouched. The acquisition briefs sat unopened. And for the first time in 5 years, Park Ji-won was not thinking about the company at all. The Singapore Economic Summit was held in the Marina Bay Sands Convention Center, a building that, from the outside, looked like a surfboard balanced on 3 enormous legs, which Ji-won had always found aggressively optimistic as an architectural metaphor. He arrived by car from Changi, checked into a suite, and spent the first hour standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the city he hadn't been in since the year Amanda left it. She hadn't left Singapore. He realized that now. She'd been here the whole time. 5 years in the same city, building something that had been quietly, methodically, professionally dismantling his market share while he sat in Seoul telling himself she'd moved on. Of course she hadn't moved on. Amanda had never moved on from anything. She metabolized it and turned it into fuel. Her mother had taught her that. The whole Okafor household had been built on that principle: you do not sit with what breaks you, you build with it. His assistant knocked at 6:30 with the conference schedule. Ji-won scanned it. The keynote lineup for day 2 included 3 government ministers, a Taiwanese semiconductor executive, and listed simply as Scion Technologies, CEO, no name, no photograph, no biography beyond the company title. He slept badly. He dreamed nothing he could name. He woke at 5 and ran 12 kilometers along the Marina Bay waterfront before the city fully woke up, because it was the only way he knew to make his own mind quiet. It didn't work. The main conference hall was large enough to lose a small country in. Ji-won took his assigned seat in the front row, Billionaire tier, the kind of seat that announced your net worth without you having to say a word, and watched the morning sessions with about 40% of his attention. The rest was on the side entrance. She walked in during the break between sessions. He saw her from across the room first. That was how it happened. She was in conversation with a man he recognized as the head of the Singaporean Economic Development Board, and she was wearing a slate gray blazer and had her braids pinned up, and she moved exactly the way he remembered her moving. With that forward momentum, like she'd already decided where she was going 3 steps before she got there. She had not changed. She was 31 now. She looked like the same person who had handed him a red pen schematic at 2 a.m. in an office the size of a storage closet, except there was something different in how she carried herself. It took him a moment to name it. She carried nothing extra. No residual anxiety, no performance, no edge of need. Just herself. Just complete. He thought, briefly and unwillingly, about the last 5 years. About 2 a.m. in hotel rooms in cities he'd flown to for deals, the way he'd sometimes scroll his phone and stop at her name. Not dialing. Just stopping. He had told himself that was grief already processed. He understood now, looking at her across that room, that it was not grief processed. It was grief postponed. It was a wound he'd learned to work around so efficiently that he had confused function for healing. She had not seen him yet. He had approximately 90 seconds before the next session started and the room filled back in. He stood up. He crossed the room. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way he had not been since he was 23 years old and pitching Novasin to their first investor. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. The man from the Economic Development Board saw Ji-won's face, said something polite, and removed himself with the discretion of a man who understood rooms. Amanda turned. The look on her face when she saw him was not what he had imagined. He had imagined, in the brief moments over 5 years when he'd allowed himself to imagine at all, something. Anger, or grief, or some crackling residue of what they had been. Instead, what moved across her face was faster than emotion. It was recognition, then assessment, then a door closing.
Park Ji-won. Her voice was even. Professional. It was the voice she used with competitors. Something about that hurt more than anger would have. Amanda. He realized he didn't know what sentence came next. He had crossed the room without a plan. That was not like him. I didn't know you were here. Yes, you did, she said. That's why you're here. No hostility. Just fact. He didn't deny it. You're Okafor. I am. Cyan Technologies. Yes. The Meridian contract. A brief pause, something that might have been satisfaction, or might just have been patience, was fairly won. Your team's proposal had 3 structural gaps in the backup architecture. I sent the committee a comparative analysis. They made the right choice. Yes. That's not why. He stopped. Started again. I was on the flight. Yesterday. Her face changed. Slightly. Almost nothing. Yuna was sitting next to me, he said. Amanda looked at him for a long moment. The background noise of the conference hall cutlery, conversation, the ambient self-importance of assembled wealth continued around them. She looked like she was deciding something. She wasn't supposed to be in first class, she said finally. The gate agent upgraded her because they felt bad about the departure delay. I didn't know until we were boarding. She told me. His voice was quieter now. She told me. I know what she told you. She tells everyone. Something moved in Amanda's eyes, not tenderness exactly, but a particular exhaustion that was clearly made of love. She has no concept of what's meant to be private. I don't know where she gets that. He almost said, she gets it from you. You've never hidden a true thing in your life. He said, she's mine. It wasn't a question. Yes, Amanda said simply. She is. Why didn't you? I told you I was pregnant, she said. The evenness cracked, briefly. Just a fracture, quickly controlled. At the airport. You were about to ask if the child was yours. I saw it in your face. And I decided that day that I was not going to spend the rest of my life asking someone to believe in things that are simply true. She straightened. If you wanted to know, you had my number. For 5 years. He had no answer to that. Because there was no answer. He thought about what it would have cost him, at the airport, to simply believe her. Not very much. A moment of humility. A willingness to say, I don't know what this is yet, but I choose you over the uncertainty. That was all it would have taken. One sentence. He had been incapable of that sentence, and in its place he had built a 5-year empire, and here he was, in a conference hall in Singapore, and the empire was impressive and the sentence was still owed. The lights in the hall dimmed, 2-minute warning for the next keynote session. We should sit down, she said. I'm speaking in this session. I know. He looked at her. Amanda. What was planted, the TerraCorp files, the access logs, the investigation cleared you. 18 months after. I know, she said. Your CFO's executive assistant contacted me eventually. She felt guilty. A pause. It was Kim Joo-hee, by the way. Your head of strategic partnerships at the time. He was on TerraCorp's payroll for 2 years. He's been convicted. Your legal team sent me the case summary. You knew. I suspected. I couldn't prove it then. Her chin lifted slightly. I proved it 18 months ago. It's part of why Cyan won 3 of Novocin's enterprise contracts last year. 2 of those clients had ongoing relationships with Joo-hee and needed to know their data was clean. I showed them what happened. I showed them exactly what a planted leak looks like. She had been quietly, methodically protecting other people from the same trap that had destroyed her life. Of course she had. Amanda. Ji-won. Her voice was not soft. But it wasn't hard either. It was just very, very clear. I need to take my seat. We can talk after the session. But whatever conversation you're trying to have with me right now, I want you to understand something first. She met his eyes. I rebuilt everything you took from me. Everything. My reputation, my career, my sense of myself. It took 3 years, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. A breath. What I did not rebuild was a space for you. So if you're here because of the company, we can talk. If you're here because of Yuna, we can talk. She picked up her folio. But if you're here because you finally believe me, I need you to know that it is 5 years too late for that to mean what you want it to mean. She walked toward the stage. Ji-won sat down. She was a superb speaker. He'd always known she had that quality of absolute conviction that makes people lean forward in their seats even before the content of the sentences lands. She spoke about competitive intelligence in infrastructure markets, about the hidden costs of trust deficits in enterprise partnerships, about what it costs a company's culture when leadership chooses political safety over uncomfortable truth. She did not look at him once. She didn't need to. Every word was architecture. Every sentence had been built with a blueprint. 300 industry leaders in that room, and Ji-won was quite certain he was the only one who understood that every single point she was making was also, precisely, deliberately, truthfully about them. He sat with that. He let it land. He did not look away. When the applause came, it was long and genuine. The man beside Ji-won leaned over and said, "Extraordinary woman. Heard she built that company alone from nothing." Ji-won said nothing. The man added, "Rumor is she's about to take Cyan public. IPO would value the company somewhere around 800 billion won. Ji-won thought, of course it would. Of course. The break between sessions was 20 minutes. Ji-won found a corner of the corridor and stood there with a coffee he was not drinking, running the last 48 hours through his head the way his engineers ran code, looking for where the logic broke. It broke at the airport. It broke 8 seconds into a confrontation in his office when he chose paper over a person he loved because it was easier and safer, and because accepting that the evidence was planted meant accepting that someone inside his company had been playing him, which meant accepting that his judgment, the thing he had built his entire identity around, had failed. And it was easier to believe Amanda had failed him than to believe he had failed himself. He had known that for about 2 years. He had not known what to do with it. Rich men with hollow chests are extremely good at finding ways not to deal with things. But he had sat on a plane next to his daughter. His daughter, who had looked at him with those dark, serious eyes and said things that were simply, entirely true. He set down the coffee. He walked back toward the hall.
He found her in the speaker's lounge, a smaller room off the main corridor, catering for a dozen people. She was at a table with a colleague, tablet open, annotating something. She saw him come in. The colleague read the room, muttered an excuse, and left. Ji-won sat down across from her without asking. Old habit. "Where is Yuna right now?" he asked. "At the hotel with my assistant." She closed the tablet. "She wanted to see the pool. She told me about you. On the plane." He watched her face. "Not everything. She's 5. But enough. She told me you call her your whole heart." Something moved in Amanda's expression, something involuntary, briefly. "I do," she said. "She said you talk about me." He said it quietly. No accusation. Just truth. A pause. "I told her your name. I told her you were a person who made a mistake. I told her that mistakes don't make someone entirely bad, just wrong in that moment." Her voice was measured. "I didn't want her to grow up with a villain for a father. That's not good for children." "Amanda." He leaned forward. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. Just looked. Let the words sit in the air. "I know," she said finally. "I know you are. I chose the wrong thing. I knew even then, some part of me knew, and I chose anyway because I didn't know how to be wrong and powerful at the same time." His jaw was tight. "I've been wrong before. I'm wrong all the time. But not like that. Not about someone like you." "Like me," she repeated. "Someone he stopped. Started differently. Someone I should have trusted without conditions. Someone who earned that completely, and he exhaled. I failed it. I know I failed it. And then I failed it again at the airport, and I failed it every time over 5 years that I opened your contact and closed it again without dialing." She was quiet. Her hands were flat on the table, the same way as had been in his office 6 years ago when he'd been reading the evidence. He remembered her hitting that desk with her open palm. Not in anger. In desperation. In the last possible attempt to make him understand. "What do you want, Ji-won?" Her voice was not unkind. It was careful. "I want to know my daughter," he said. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing." He held her gaze. "And I want you to know that the rest of it, the company, TerraCorp, the Meridian contract, whatever happens between us in business, none of that changes what I owe you as an apology. Those are separate. This one has nothing to do with what Cyan is worth or what Novason loses. This is just, he exhaled, me telling you that you were right and I was wrong, and I would give back every year of success if it meant I'd made the right choice at that airport. Amanda looked at him for a long time. The speaker's lounge was quiet. Through the glass partition, they could see the conference reconvening, hundreds of people taking their seats. You can't give it back, she said. That's not how this works. I know. Yuna is going to want to know who you are. She said it straightforwardly, the way she said all things that were simply true. She's been asking more questions lately. About fathers. Her friend Ji-young has a father who comes to school events. She asked me last month why her daddy doesn't come to hers. A pause. I told her daddies sometimes get lost. She said, and here, briefly, unguardedly, something gentle crossed Amanda's face, she said, but we could put up signs, Mommy. Like for lost cats. Ji-won laughed. It came out of him involuntarily, sudden and completely unguarded, the laugh of someone who is surprised by his own heart. Amanda watched him laugh. She did not laugh. But she didn't look away. She sounds like you, he said. She is exactly like me, Amanda said. Except she's kinder. I'm working on that in myself. A pause. She does have your eyes. I know. I saw. Another silence. Outside, the conference had started again. Neither of them moved. I'm not saying yes to anything, Amanda said. To be clear. Not to whatever you're building toward. You don't get 5 years of damage repaired in a speaker's lounge in 40 minutes. I know. But. She picked up the tablet. Yuna is at the Mandarin Oriental. I'll have my assistant take her to the lobby at 4 o'clock. You can have an hour. She looked at him steadily. She deserves to know her father. That has nothing to do with what I need. Ji-won nodded. His throat was tight. If you let her down, Amanda said quietly, without drama, the way you state a physical law, I will make sure she never waits for you a second time. Do you understand me? Completely, he said. She nodded. She opened the tablet again. He stood. He was almost at the door when she spoke. Ji-won. He turned. The algorithm, she said. The original schematic. I still have the napkin. A pause. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on the tablet. Sometimes I look at it. I don't know why I kept it. He stood there for a moment. He did not have the right words. He wasn't sure the right words existed. I kept the red pen, he said. From the schematic. The one you slid under the door. She looked up then. Something passed between them. Not reconciliation. Not yet. Something older and quieter. The recognition of two people who had, despite everything, never fully stopped knowing each other. The Mandarin Oriental lobby was all polished marble and quiet fountains, and the particular hush of expensive space. Ji-won arrived at 10 minutes to 4, which was the first time in 5 years he had been early to anything that was not a business meeting. He sat in a chair facing the elevator bank. His hands were loose on his knees. He was, for the first time since 30,000 feet, not trying to prepare. The elevator opened at 4 exactly. Amanda's assistant stepped out, a young woman who recognized Ji-won, said nothing and very professionally stepped to one side. Yuna came out behind her. She was in different clothes now, not the plain outfit, but a yellow dress with small white flowers that someone had clearly let her choose herself. She had her space shuttle backpack. She was holding a biscuit from what appeared to be a hotel courtesy plate, and she was eating it with the focused commitment of someone who considers food a serious endeavor. Then she looked up and saw him. She stopped walking. He did not stand up immediately. He stayed at her level or close to it. He let her look. You're the man from the plane, she said. I am. Mommy said I could talk to you today. She came a few steps closer. She said you know each other. We do. We did. He exhaled. Yes, we know each other. Yuna studied him with those extraordinary eyes, her mother's judgment, his own face, and something entirely her own in the combination. She took another bite of the biscuit. Why do you look scared? She asked, with the complete frank curiosity of a 5-year-old. Because I want you to like me, he said. And that matters a lot to me. She seemed to consider whether this was a satisfactory answer. She came one step closer. I already told you you look sad, she said. On the plane. Do you feel better now? A little, he said. Yes, a little better. She nodded, as if this confirmed something. Then she held out the biscuit, not the remainder, but a piece she'd clearly just broken off, and offered it to him with the complete solemnity of someone performing a very significant act. He took it. She sat down in the chair beside him. She swung her feet, which still didn't reach the floor. She finished the rest of her biscuit. Outside the windows, Singapore glittered in the late afternoon heat. Are you going to forget us again? She asked. His throat closed completely. No, he said, when he could. I am not. She turned to look at him, those eyes, wide and serious and utterly without armor, the way only children look at people, the way he once looked at things before he learned to be careful about what he let himself want. Promise, she said. I promise, he said. She seemed satisfied with this. She turned back to the lobby, watching a fountain where two small jets of water crossed in an arc and fell together into the same pool. There is a particular kind of regret that does not announce itself loudly. It doesn't arrive in a single terrible moment. It arrives in accumulation, in every small choice to put the phone face down, to close the contact without dialing, to choose pride over the terrifying work of being wrong. It arrives in years. And the cost of it is not always paid by the person who made the choices. Sometimes it is paid by a woman sitting in a studio apartment in Singapore, negotiating the world alone with one hand on her stomach, calling her mother in Aka at midnight just to hear a familiar voice. Sometimes it is paid by a little girl who asks, at 4 years old, why her daddy doesn't come to school events, and proposes with total sincerity that they put up signs. Park Ji-won sat in the lobby of a hotel in Singapore with a piece of biscuit in his hand and his daughter's feet swinging beside him, and he thought about every door he had kept closed. He thought about the 8 seconds in his office when a clock measured the moment he chose paper over 5 years. He thought about the airport and the gray cardigan and the particular sound of someone's voice when it goes quiet in a way that tells you they have made a decision they will not unmake. He thought about all the people right now, in this moment, across 1,000 different cities, who were sitting on something unsaid, who had someone's name in their phone, who had made a choice or were about to make one, and who would spend the next 5 years living in the space that choice carved out. All the Jiwons who had not yet arrived at the lobby. All the Amandas still in their spare rooms, still building, still refusing to be broken. He could not give the years back. Amanda had been clear about that, and Amanda was always clear. But he was here now. And Yuna was beside him, swinging her feet, and the fountain was running, and outside the city was enormous and indifferent and full of people who were, at this exact moment, in the middle of their own accumulations, their own small choices, their own doors. If you have someone in your life you've been too proud to call, someone who told you the truth and you chose the evidence instead, this is the moment. Not tomorrow. Now. Because the years do not wait for pride to finish its argument. Like this video if you believe in second chances, and subscribe, because the next story is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Drop a comment below. What would you have done at that airport? Leave it below. We read every single one. At 5:30, Amanda walked into the lobby. She had changed out of the conference blazer into something simpler. She stood at the entrance to the lobby and watched just for a moment before either of them saw her daughter, and the man who had left them both, sitting side by side in matching chairs, talking about something that was making Yuna illustrate a point with both hands at once, the way she always did when she was very interested in explaining something. Something shifted in Amanda's chest. Not forgiveness. That was a longer road, a harder road, and she was only at the beginning of understanding whether she wanted to walk it. But something. Yuna spotted her. Mommy, he knows what the stratosphere is. I told him about the clouds and he explained. I heard. Amanda crossed the lobby. She looked at Jiwon. He looked at her. No words. Not yet. There were years of words waiting, and they would come in their time. Yuna slid off her chair and took her mother's hand. Then, with the unself-conscious logic of someone who found the arrangement obviously correct, she reached her other hand up to Jiwon. He looked down at it. He took it. Yuna stood between them, holding both their hands, and looked up at the fountain. When we go home, she said cheerfully, addressing no one in particular. Can we have noodles? I want the kind with the egg. Amanda laughed, a real one, small and surprised. She looked at Jiwon over their daughter's head. He was looking back at her. Noodles, he said. Yes. Absolutely. Outside, Singapore turned gold in the last of the afternoon light. Yuna swung her feet and hummed something tuneless and entirely self-satisfied, the way children do when the world has arranged itself correctly. She had no idea what she had started on a plane at 30,000 feet. She had no idea that 9 words from a 5-year-old, spoken without strategy, without agenda, with nothing but the clear-eyed honesty of someone who had not yet learned to protect herself from truth, had opened a door that 2 adults had been too proud and too bruised to open themselves for 5 years. Children are like that. They walk into the rooms we've locked and they look around and they say, "Why is it dark in here?" And sometimes that is enough. And for the first time in 5 years, the silence between Park Ji-won and Amanda Okafor was not a wall. It was just a beginning.